What's up, everybody? I'm Jessie, your friendly neighborhood boondock ballistician, and today I wanted to chat with you guys about 8.6 Blackout and why I feel it's kind of just a trendy gimmick round. I do want to preface this video with saying that I haven't personally shot this round out to any meaningful range. Definitely haven't shot any larger game with it, and I have only played with like the Q boombox or fix in stores, kind of just held them. The rifles a lot of people associate this round with, so my opinions on this do come strictly from an academic standpoint. I don't know what I don't know, but I'm working with the information that I have available to me, which unfortunately for this whole configuration is very limited. The Q rifle itself was comfortable to hold, very light. I am sure there is some love for this caliber. Strictly off of that, we're allowed to have preferences on what rifles we like, but either way, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and let's get started. I think it's important to talk about use case here for a little bit, since that is part of the selling point. But obviously we're going to spend a lot of the time regarding the whole 1-3 twist rate nonsense, since that is the shtick. But starting with use case to kind of establish some context, obviously the big push for this round is its ability to still deliver high energy from a small package, all while being able to maintain a quieter shot, especially if using a suppressor. 8.6 Blackout does offer a 338 projectile, kind of smushed into a castrated 6.5 Creedmoor case, toted as a more powerful alternative than 300 Blackout, and probably most important, advertise that the key characteristic is increased lethality due to a 1-3 twist rate. Q does boast the boombox as a tactical weapon, but from a consumer point of view, I think a lot of us see the boombox and 8.6 Blackout in a hunting fashion. Definitely discussed a lot in that capacity, largely due to Kevin Brittingham's personal enjoyment with hunting. So good place to start here is going to be discussing the viability of this caliber in comparison to other alternatives and other alternatives within their respective use case. Part of the selling point is noise, so it seems a little silly to talk about supersonic, not that that's loud really either for this round. But either way, 8.6 supers are considered effective out to about 450 yards. Subs fall into the range of 300 to 400, and of course some wriggle room depending on the grains and barrel length and all of that. If you're Kevin or your average big game hunter, you're probably taking your shot within the 200 to 300 yard range. There's obviously exceptions to this, but that's considered average for big game. So in theory, this round would be sufficient to hunt with within that capacity. But if you do start to look at trajectory, even within the effective range, these numbers only get worse for 8.6 Blackout the further out you go. It becomes very clear that 8.6 Blackout has significant bullet drop compared to other hunting alternatives. Even at the 200 yard mark, 8.6 Blackout will exhibit a bullet drop of about 9 inches, whereas 338 will only see about a 2.5 inch drop, not even touching on the energy differences. Obviously, there are a lot of other calibers out there that can provide higher velocity, more energy on target at especially different ranges. Of course, different size packages with firearms depending on the type of platform you like to shoot. And we've obviously all seen Kevin's posts, which means 8.6 Blackout is certainly going to be viable for hunting. Can't deny that, we've seen it, it's been done. But just because it is an available tool in the shed does not mean it is the best tool in the shed. I could make a whole separate video on this alone. I don't want to focus on it since the main argument here is going to be that 1-3 twist rate and how amazing that rotational energy is for terminal performance. 300 Blackout, which is also a little love child of Kevin Brittingham and AAC, took a lot of popularity due to some niche applications for your SOCOM guys. And Q aimed to accomplish the same goal, but obviously with increased lethality. 8.6 Blackout does have a higher ballistic coefficient than its baby brother and does maintain close to double the energy at various distances. So, of course, 8.6 Blackout is going to be a better sell than 300. Can't argue that one. We can see the appeal at this point, right? Double the energy would also follow that there is increased stopping power at those various distances, which means 8.6 will and should have better on-target performance than 300 Blackout. But this is obvious. It's a significantly larger bullet. But I don't know, what do we say about perhaps 375 Raptor, 458 SOCOM? There is a whole market of other calibers that have clear evidence of providing better performance through both stability, velocity, energy considerations, and rounds that maintain that energy significantly better at distances, which is, of course, very important. Something like 375 Raptor will maintain more energy at a far greater distance than 8.6 Blackout, meaning you can use it within a lot more circumstances and still have effective performance. But we're still missing the point here, right? Q justifies 8.6 via its subsonic performance, but perhaps largely due to that 1-3 twist rate, that insane number that's going to add increased lethality due to that rotational energy. So we need to interrogate that. We can look at the numbers. Obviously 1-3 is going to provide significantly more RPMs to the projectile than say 1.5, 1.8, you name it. So yes, more rotational energy. But even the ballistic assistant here states that rotational energy from 1-3 twist is only about 4% of your total muzzle energy. So largely not a significant portion of what's going to be impacting your target. For most supersonic applications, rotational kinetic energy on projectile is completely ignored and not even included in your calculations because it has such a negligible effect. And your equations for translational kinetic energy do not include this variable at all. Subsonics are obviously a very different animal. Spin will help with stability, and that spin will make a much bigger difference on expansion. So perhaps worth considering for subsonics in these scenarios. Faster twist rate will increase energy transfer on target. We are gonna get into those gel performance videos, so bear with my train of thought here first. But this increase in energy doesn't necessarily matter if that event is occurring too late within the target. It's great if you can dump all of that energy and dump more of that energy, but a bigger conversation is where in target that energy is going. Doesn't help us if it's over penetrating, not dumping at the right points or in the right ways for our applications, but we'll get more into the gel. Rifle Shooter Magazine has an article that actually claims a 17% increase in total energy between 1.3 and 1.8 twist rates, which is going to be derived from the change in translational plus rotational kinetic energy for their respective twists. A 300 grain 8.6 Blackout projectile going 1,050 feet per second. I went with this number because that's what I see in the boxes. It obviously varies a little bit, but it's going to have a translational kinetic energy of 734 foot-pounds, give or take. But for rotational energy, can't really calculate this one because we don't know the moment of inertia, and that's not something that we can easily determine. But for people in my position, there's a couple of ways we can go about estimating it. We're gonna take some guesses, use a cylinder, but obviously a bullet is far more complex in shape, weight distributions, everything else. But what I do know is rotational energy equals 1/2 I little lowercase omega squared. We can do rough estimates of this as a cylinder. So for the 338 projectile at 300 grains, we do get an estimate of I equals 1.78 times 10 to the negative 7th. Plug and chug that into some calculators. And for a 1.8, you will get a K rotation of 23.324 foot-pounds. And for a 1.3, you get 45.71 foot-pounds, which potentially double the increase in rotational energy here. Sounds great. But the total energy goes from 779.7 for 1.3 to 757.3 for 1.8, which is only a 2.963% increase in total energy between the two twist rates. Very different number than your 17%. But wait, there's more. Talking with a buddy of mine about this, and he had the bright idea of trying this calculation with a couple of different methods. So we went and did the calculation off with a point mass assumption as well as a hollow cylinder assumption, just to kind of see where our ranges were at. But point mass would essentially wind up being your theoretical maximum for this scenario. Mind you, this is very much not possible. If you guys are familiar with point mass, it assumes, as the name suggests, all of the mass at a single point within the projectile, fails to account for projectile motion, drag, stability, you name it, everything. It is very much a theoretical maximum. Cannot occur. For 1.3, this method resulted in a 92 foot-pound rotational energy, and for 1.8, a 5.5 pound increase. Again, huge difference between the two, strictly looking at rotational energy. But that means that the total energy for the systems becomes a conversation of 826 versus 739.5. Still sounds big, but only an 11.7% increase in total energy. The article did state using 1,000 feet per second. That's gonna wind up actually making it a little less for them. But either way, Schaefer, if you're watching this, I just want to know where you got your numbers from here. Because from a theoretical maximum standpoint, I wasn't able to hit 17%. I think that's largely pushing it, considering that given a perfect scenario with no outside variables, no weight distribution considerations, I was only hitting 12. There's a lot of factors to consider, but a slower twist rate with a more rapidly expanding projectile could potentially accomplish the same terminal feats that 1.3 with a very specific solid copper projectile is potentially able to do. So there's options without really stressing your round to its absolute threshold capacities. But we do keep hearing about this blender effect, which you can absolutely sell me on as a concept. We've all seen the videos of 8.6 Blackout in gel, and my God, did that create a lot of hype for this round. There was so much buzz around how reactive the 8.6 Blackout looked in gel from a 1.3 twist rate. Granted, those videos do have some controversy over, hey, they put water on top of it to make it look better, whatever. Not gonna comment on those. If you guys know me, then you know I do have very strong opinions about a lot of the gel videos available on YouTube to begin with. Hopefully one day I can afford some blocks and we can teach you guys a proper analysis. But potentially cheap tricks aside, the big video everyone was talking about does compare a 1.3 versus a 1.9 twist rate, which that alone is a very stupid comparison in my opinion. Q's whole shtick is that 1.3 is absolutely necessary for good lethality, and reports about this caliber really push the idea that anything past 1.5 is frankly unusable. You see a lot of posts that say 1.7 is going to be unsuitable for the round, meaning 1.9 is absolutely ridiculous for their propositions. Saying, look how amazing 1.3 is compared to a twist rate that you're pushing as ineffective for that calibers is quite frankly insulting to the viewers. But let's talk about that video. Potential water gimmick aside, twist rates aside. So, if we look at the slow-mo video here, we can see that the 1.3 does have a curved path as it's coming through the gel block, which, depending on your applications, probably a little less ideal than some straight penetration. The curve does indicate that yaw is occurring, which is exactly what Kevin wants. This whole thing was designed to have max yaw, but it could also indicate that there's gonna be some variability between shots. Realistically, we shouldn't be looking at one block, we should be looking at a few so that we can be sure we're properly assessing the round's performance. Yeah, I mean, this slow-mo is impressive, right? In this test, you can see, everyone loves to see it, that the 1.3 block definitely dumps a lot of the energy right off the bat. There is no denying that that is a huge plume, but it's also a 10% gel block. The 10% gel is going to tear way more easily than what flesh, muscle, lung tissue, whatever is going to do, and not be a proper representation of in body. So of course it looks impressive, but it would be foolish to say that that's exactly what's happening. Don't let that pretty little spark fool you, because that could happen for a number of reasons. Probably in this case, the rapidly expanding and collapsing gel as it's burning through the vapors is what's going to create that in this instance. But I also do think it's important to note here that this is a 210 grain projectile that they're shooting, which means this is supersonic. All of the big claims we hear are pushing for 300 subsonic and 1.3 performance. And not that this isn't impressive looking in gel, it's just not the big push of the projectile. Depending on your applications and lethality conversations, you usually do want to see that initiation for the projectile occur sub within that 8-inch point on the block. Obviously, this is going to make a difference depending on if you want to get through armor, things like that. You want to shift that neck out a little bit to allow for that penetration prior to expansion occurring. We can see here that while the 1.3 dumps a lot of energy at the start, the 1.9 is able to maintain energy transfer throughout. It does seem to keep a more consistent cavity size as it travels throughout the gel block. And honestly, considering how unviable 1.9 is supposed to be for this configuration, that initial energy dump really isn't all that much smaller than what the 1.3 is providing. Obviously, there is a difference, but 1.9's not supposed to work, remember? I mentioned the disruption in gel is going to be a lot more different than flesh, especially for the 10% blocks, of course. But the conversation of temporary cavities, hydrostatic shock, all of that is one of debate to begin with. It's largely regarded that you need to hit about 2,000 feet per second. Of course, this changes on what you're shooting. We're gonna go with the general here. 2,000 feet per second is what's going to be considered that point where that temporary cavity is actually going to start leaving permanent effects on the target. If we're shooting the 300 grain 8.6 Blackout, not what's pictured in the slow-mo video, but if we're shooting a 300 grain 8.6 Blackout out of a 12-inch barrel, that's gonna be going about 1,014 feet per second at 100 yards. And then for the 210 grain projectile that they pictured, it's going to be hitting just under 2K feet per second, close to that threshold, which means it very well could be having an impact, but we don't know off of one video here. If you really wanted to assess these properly, you're gonna have to look at the blocks while they are settled, and this video certainly does not show you that. I did try and get a little bit of a pause here, this is terrible, but you can see that the cavity present in the 1.3 block doesn't look all that large once things are settled down. Never mind the fact that both of these blocks indicate potential concerns for overpenetration. Garandam did make a video about the lethality of 8.6, and in that video he tested a couple of different variations within the family. And thanks to that video, I was able to get some stills of the block actually settled so we can really look at it a little bit better here. One of the ones that he tested was a 210 grain projectile, similar to the one that was in that initial slow-mo video. We can get a better still off of this and confirm the size of the cavity, and kind of like what I expected, that permanent cavity that's left over that really isn't all that large. Not that it's not nice looking, that corkscrew from the projectile spinning so fast is obviously very attractive in gel, but there's also a lot of other gel blocks that look kind of similar from hollow points and other handgun calibers. One of the other projectiles that he tested was the 300 grain projectile, which again is what's supposed to be the dream team with this 1.3 twist. The supersonic performance is what we keep hearing about. And when you look at this data, we can see it's pretty evident that the projectile actually traveled a good bit of distance before that initiation event started to occur. That long neck shows that the expansion event didn't truly happen until past halfway down the blocks, post that 8 inches mark. For the subsonic performance, this still shot of the gel block realistically isn't anything to write home about. I don't dislike 8.6 Blackout. I think just like 300 Blackout, it can have a lot of really cool applications through special force kinds of needs, really use case scenarios, but not an everyday kind of round. Certainly not something that I would have a need for. Granted, if you just like collecting things and you think it's cool, then so be it. That's all you need to say. But I really do think that the 1.3 twist rate is kind of a gimmick to help Q stand out in the market. bullets have eccentric mass, more rotational velocity means more outward force from that eccentric mass. So fast twist rates cause erratic dispersion. This isn't new. We know this. And the potential benefit of this realistically will have quickly diminishing returns in regards to lethality. Hey, maybe Kevin's right. Maybe our understanding of terminal ballistics is lacking in this area, which would actually be really cool. Like I said in the beginning, I could very well be wrong, but none of the data that's available to the consumer at this point in time is helping sell their claims. And as one of the manufacturers companies involved, if you're really trying to push this, it shouldn't be that hard for you guys to put out data that is concrete and clear in regards to what you're claiming this round is capable of. To make matters worse, that 1-3 twist rate means that you have limited availability for components for both projectiles and weapons. You're talking maybe a 2 to 6%, realistically 2 to 6% increase in total kinetic energy at the expense of a very limited market with a questionable use case to begin with, and debatably better alternatives for each use case. Realistically, that 1-3 twist rate will help with stability on heavier projectiles, and that does contribute to energy transfer. But even so, this round was actually intended for 1-5. That is considered the SAMI standard. That's considered the twist rate that is most well-balanced for performance in all 8.6 Blackout variations. Q and Lehigh did team up to make 1-3 work and provide max yaw, but that doesn't come without consequences. Depending on your bullet weight, some calculations for RPMs per 8.6 Blackout from a 1-3 twist, anywhere from a whopping 240,000 to possibly 500,000 RPMs, which is an absurd amount of angular momentum and consequently torque. One day I'll say that right. It would make sense that this rotational force is going to impart way more stress on your barrel and your action, as that bullet's going to push back on the rifling with a much higher force than what you normally see. So in the long run, you're probably seeing way more wear and tear on your bolt faces and locking lugs, barrel suppressors, the works. And while torque is usually a non-concern, it would be kind of foolish to say that for 1-3 it's negligible. No, your projectile won't fall apart so long as you're using a very specific solid copper projectile. There's the bonded lead core ones available, but even those were designed with 1-5 in mind and do have limitations within the 1-3 twist rates. And actually, while developing barrels for this, Faxon originally had data with one approved lead bullet that was promptly removed from their available data, their available websites, because early consumers of this experienced a whirlwind of issues that resulted in destroying their weapons, presumably due to the lead core hitting way too high of RPMs and falling apart. Those typically do have their limit around 350,000 RPMs, but to make the situation worse, even most fast copper expanding bullets are not recommended for this configuration. So you're extremely limited in what's considered usable within this scenario. That's really all I had for you guys on this one. I would legitimately love to be able to get more concrete data, spend some time trying this out and really test it in a much more scientific fashion than what we can currently see, because it's possible that my calculations are off basis, that they're including variables I'm not aware of. There's different approaches on how to analyze these things, and I would certainly imagine that they have equipment to measure rather than having to do these hands-on calculations. But I still stand by the fact that what's being given to the consumer doesn't really help sell their case. And again, if you like it just to like it, so be it. I have plenty of shitty guns that I will stand by for no reason other than aesthetic, something stupid, and there's nothing wrong with that. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope for some good conversations down below. Hopefully you guys can contribute to kind of understanding this, and maybe we can hash through a better analysis. But either way, hope to see you guys in the next video.